What it is, y'all, it's your old boy Pilk, and we've got to talk about episode 8 of Wistoria, because I'm going to be honest with you guys. Had I not read the manga, I would not be prepared for this episode. Now, on the face of it, we knew sort of what we were getting into with this episode based on the preview. Now, in the preview, we knew that it was going to be essentially date night for Will and Colette. That much is kind of true, but the episode actually kicks off with kind of a not victory party with Will and all the dwarves and everything. It's great. It's fantastic. I have a lot to say about this portion of the episode actually in tomorrow's breakdown, where I compare the manga and the anime. But for now, you know, the episode just kind of does what it does. Now, I guess I should actually kick this off by getting into some of my ratings, but it's really hard to rate this episode because it's not a very action-packed episode. So it's really hard to judge the animation based on what we saw. But really, for what we saw, you know, you're talking a solid 9 out of 10, but it really wasn't an episode that flexes the animation per se. So it's a really tough thing to say, yeah, it's a top-notch episode, but they really weren't, the animators weren't really flexed like they were in the last episode. The last episode actually lost marks because there were a lot of times where Will's motions didn't necessarily keep up with the CGI backgrounds. Not necessarily a bad thing, but, and I actually, for reasons I shan't get into here, I've actually been working with that footage. Some of you guys know what that means. And with that being said and done, I did notice some flaws in the last episode that I didn't even notice on the initial watch. It could honestly be because of the footage that I have, but realistically, there were some overall faults. So if I'm comparing this episode to that episode, this episode was better, but it was also better because the animators weren't forced into a corner of like having to flex the most of their might. So it's a tough thing to judge. So overall, I'm just going to say raw enjoyment of this episode is a complete 10 out of 10 for me. And I know that sounds weird. We'll get into why that is shortly. But before I do so, one thing I will say, guys, if you haven't watched this episode, it's a great time to stop. Come back and check this out after you watch the episode, because we are going to get into some major spoilers as we go along. So that was your one warning. Let's get into it. So after the whole deal with the dwarves is done, actually it was really fun. I love this about the whole situation with the dwarves. Obviously, you've got, Colette and Werkner, and they're all talking to Will, and they're all having their own little talks about what happened in the tournament. And you find out that Julius is actually in the back doing dishes, and one of the dwarves comes by. Actually, one reminds me a lot of Mamma Mia from Danmachi. There's a lot of Danmachi references in this show, believe it or not. We'll get to one later. It's a lot of fun. But if you guys aren't watching Danmachi, Season 5 is coming up really, really, really soon. It's a great time to brush up. Omori, who the writer for this, not the person who drew the manga, but the actual writer who wrote the story, also does that series. And fantastic writer. I absolutely adore his work. I say that every episode. But there's a lot of parallels to the two series, and largely by design. So we find that old boy is he's doing the dishes. He's basically being there. They say to him, they're like, yeah, we'll forgive you for your trespasses, but not because you said apologize. You actually got to put in work, son. So I absolutely love that. I thought that was fantastic. And it wasn't overly serious. It was all very lighthearted and very enjoyable. And the first half of this episode is extremely lighthearted, and I love it. So we find out that basically Will goes back to school the next day, and everybody's like, we know what old boy can do. And there was a lot of questions. Werkner even mentioned to him, he's like, what is going to happen tomorrow when you go back to school? Because now people know what you're capable of. It could go one of two ways. Like, he can either get an insane amount of respect, and OMFG and everybody wants him on their team because, they have a new big tournament thing coming up. We'll get to that here later on in the episode. But they kind of mentioned it in passing. He's like, and everybody's going to be looking for teams. So you got to start thinking about what teams are you going to bring to the table, right? So one thing kind of leads to another, And he goes to school, and suddenly he's just getting bombarded with requests. Everybody's like, we want you on our team. We want you. We were going into the dungeon. We need someone of your skills on our team. And everybody's trying to get him on their team. And Colette just gets crazy jealous. And she's like, nah, he's busy. He can't. Because he's going out with me tomorrow, and we're going shopping, which is great. I love that that's her like whole thing. Like, no, leave him alone. I love how defensive she gets for him. And Will, I mean, as lighthearted and you know, Will outside of the dungeon and when he's not got his goggles on, he's not going serious, he's all about it. He's like, he's like, it's my moment of popularity. Let's go. I love it. And Colette's just like, no, bro, no. This is all they're fake fans. They're fake fans. They're fake fans. And so she just kind of drags him off. And everyone's just trying to get Will to join. And one thing leads to another. Anyway, it gets to the night before, and there's this whole build-up with... and you don't realize this is actually foreshadowing, but there's actually foreshadowing here because you've got Colette and her roommate, and they're talking about, oh, tomorrow's going to be your big date. Is it a date? Of course it's a date. That's the big question in everyone's mind. Is it a date? Sure, it's a date. It's not a date. Is it a date? Of course it's a date. And she's like, well, you got to dress up. The roommate's like, you got to dress up real nice because if you do that, that makes it a date, more or less. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, pretty much. So the big day comes, okay? And Will and Colette meet up, and Colette's dressed to the T's. She's absolutely like, you know, like she's as dressed up as you will ever probably see her in the series. And it's fantastic. And Will's like, oh, hey, good morning. Hi, nice to meet you. You look nice today. And that's kind of pretty much Will's impression. And she's like, yeah. He noticed-ish. But that's when we get a mysterious third party. And we find out that that is actually Will's roommate. And she's like, oh, it's not a date. Or is it? I love this. Because while this is a trope, and while I would not call this predictable, I didn't see this coming, but it is definitely a thing. You find out that the roommate is madly in love with Will, which is I say hilarious, but the way it goes down is absolutely fantastic. Because the roommate's getting between him and Colette. Roommate starts holding hands. They start they are now full on fighting for Will's affection. And Will doesn't even realize it. He's so oblivious to the situation. And he even mentions to her, he's like, oh yeah, no, we take baths together. It's just what it is. And the moment that broke me is Will even mentions his, how do I word this without risking YouTube's policies? Basically, Will mentions how well endowed, I can't remember his name, but oh boy, his roommate, how well endowed he is. And he's just point blank. He's like, oh yeah, dude's definitely a shower, not a grower. And just, everybody's like, what? But Will's oblivious. He has no idea what he's actually implicating himself into. Just totally oblivious. And the roommate's all over him. Colette's like in the background. They have this whole thing where, like, you know, they get ice cream, they get drinks, they get all this stuff. And every single time Colette's trying to get one up, and every single time she's shut down. And the roommate's just like, I will win. This is, you know, we are now vying for position. This is the love triangle, and I am going to win. And I was here for it. I was like, this is great. Because Will's got no idea. It was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I was genuinely enjoying this. It was so funny. And of course, out of nowhere, here comes a fourth party. Will basically wanders off while they're just bickering. And he's down a dark alley, and here comes somebody out of the shadows, and she's like, Will Seifert? And he's like, who you? New phone, who this? Right? And she's like, come with me. And of course, Will's like, all right, whatever. And this is where the episode goes from silly and funny and lighthearted. It makes an abrupt turn, and you feel it doesn't feel out of place. We knew this was gonna be a cool down episode, but what's really cool is its first half of it's cool down. Second half of it is a warm up exercise, which I absolutely love. None of this felt out of place. None of this felt like abrupt or brash. All of it melted and mingled so well together, which really just gives me that 10 out of 10 like enjoyment vibe. You could really tell the writing here is on point. And she invites him into basically this huge tavern looking place, and he's invited more or less into a tea room where sits the elven dude, and I apologize, I can't remember his name, the one who actually got the crown and was like, you guys are being idiots. That's how you win. And of course, the two guys that absolutely can't stand Will the most, and then old girl. And he starts to mention her. She's like, oh, she's Miss Perfect. She's got like top marks and everything. She's got like a perfect score. In fact, at the end of the manga, they break down how the scores work. And I'll go into more of that tomorrow. But essentially, old girl's got a perfect score. She's got an absolutely immaculate score. And Will's like, I don't belong here. And she's like, oh no, you do. You totally do. And then they start going into like, we need him for this, we need him for that. He'll help our dungeon party, which is really funny because normally you think of a dungeon party being like 4, and a lot of people like have had 4 up till now. We've had 3s and we have 4. We haven't really seen the dungeon party of 5, but this is 5 of the top, or 4 of the top students with Will, which really shows you where he's come just in the last few episodes. So obviously, like I said, Julius is there. Fire dude is there. I can't remember his name. And the elven dude and old girl. And essentially what winds up happening is, you watch the episode, you already know, but it's Fire dude and Ice dude are now just going head to head. They're going at it. And I love this moment because literally it's like Relax-A-Vision. Elven boy's just like, nope. Field of Daisies. Y'all need to simmer. Y'all need to calm down. It's too much. It's too brash. You just chill. And old girl's just like, matter of fact, she's like, all right, everybody has a coin. Here's a cup. Here's how this is going to work. Here's why this is the best option. And this is why, if the 5 of us work together, we will be the number 1 team. And everyone's just kind of like, I hate that you're right, but you're right. So everybody's, dimes in the cup, and Will's over there like, yeet, I mean, and can you really blame him? Because obviously this is the moment he's been building up to. This is the whole thing. So now they've got basically like the top-notch dungeon party, and he's once again going to be a part of it. But now he's earned it. He's not just there because he's there. He's actually earned it, and he's earning respect. And I love that. I absolutely love that. But we got to get to the moment here, and I have to talk about this a little bit. Maybe I'm reading into this too much. Now, little side note here, and I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow too, but if you didn't play Danmachi Omori Freeze, and just to basically paraphrase, we had an anniversary event in that game where we got a backstory for the Danmachi story, which included this character, Fianna. And Fianna, for all intents and purposes, was let's call her a halfling. It's kind of what she is. She's more or less that universe's hobbit-ish type creature. Except she was like the greatest knight. And she was, they called them the Knights of Fianna, and Fianna was her name, and obviously, and she was just like this phenomenal character. They even made some light novels about her whole story. It was crazy. The long and the short of it is, I kind of feel they talk about old girl, the one that called Will into the room, and they're like, old girl is a member of the Owenshouse family, and she's like, yep, and we don't live long. We live very short lives, but we live amazing lives. And we'll get more into what that means next episode, but they have this great shot of her on the back of one of her family members on the back of a dragon. I think in the show it almost looked like a horse, but in the manga it's a dragon. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. I got to go back and rewatch that cell because it was a passing moment. To me, it looked like a horse in the anime, but in the manga, it's definitely a dragon. Which just goes to show how awesome she is. She's, just this clad in this very regal looking attire, but no, very noble appearing and whatnot. Very much looked like Fiona from that series. To me, it looked fantastic. It very much was a throwback to that. And I love that Omori does this, puts these throwbacks in there. And it's like little nods to stuff that if you know, you know. Especially that, which is such a side story thing that a lot of people probably would not be in tune with. But for the people that know, they know. So she's like, I'm in Owen's house. And she's like, we don't live long, but we are going to be amazing. Absolutely amazing. And of course, Will's like, I'm in. Everybody's in. Now, before I get to there's one little section here that was really interesting. They have the whole breakdown of, okay, they go back to the school. Here's the dungeon. Everything's going to be happening. And we know now that in the next episode it's going to kick off like that. Okay, the next episode is going to go hard. We'll get more into what that means in tomorrow's manga review because there's a couple things at the end of the chapter that they didn't actually cover that I'm no doubt they're going to put into the next episode. If you want to know more about that, tune into tomorrow's video. But the one thing that really struck me here, and we mentioned at the beginning of the series, is how brutal the dungeon can be. We saw a couple people that I was convinced were completely dead, and somehow they managed to survive. And here, straight up, the teachers are like, hey, by the way, guys, some of y'all are going to die. There's no two ways about it. Some of y'all going to die. Go have fun! Bye, kids. They didn't sugarcoat it at all. They didn't sugarcoat it one bit. So the next episode is obviously going to be the kickoff of them going into the dungeon. But then we get this really, and actually kind of like in the interim here, we get this really interesting character. And we know nothing. We just literally got a glimpse of this kind of cloaked, very like, I don't want to call him Darth Vader-ish, but a little bit. He's got basically markings, almost like assassin-like. But obviously, everyone in the story is mages and whatnot. And he's talking about somebody sent him down there and said it was, take out the good guys. Clearly, this guy's evil as sin. In fact, he's already got somebody by. But if he doesn't? At first, they kind of lead you to believe that he's got somebody by the head and literally squeezes their neck and then just pops their head right off. And it's just that moment where you're like, oh, we're about to get darker than we've ever gotten in this series. This is about to get bad. But it wasn't just him, which was really interesting. It was almost like a smoke, like a magic familiar of sorts that he was almost using like a puppet. So like, Old Boy doesn't even do his dirty work. Old Boy is so powerful that he's got literally like a smoke familiar that is able to do the heavy lifting for him, which is just crazy. Now, they kind of chuck that in between Will being recruited and when the teachers were like, all right, go to the dungeon, boys. Go die. Have fun. So very much they're setting this up for this is going to be brutal. And I haven't read a forward in the manga. I will be, but for the sake of this episode, I'm just going to predict now. I think somebody important to the story is probably going to die. And I feel like they're foreshadowing that old girl's not going to make it. I kind of feel like they're really setting it up. Because if you really think about it, think about this logically. The Magi vendor, and this is where we're going to get into some predictions and whatnot. And I have not read forward in the manga, so this is not a spoiler. I'm just dropping a prediction here. The Magi vendor is 5 people, and there's 5 people in that room. But we already know that Elfie's not going anywhere. However, that makes 2 ice people's. Man, I can't say anything because I know a couple things from the manga, but I'll just say I just don't think... I think they're foreshadowing Old Girl's death. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Omori has proven already in this episode that things can get unpredictable, and this episode, it was an unpredictable thing that was really humorous, but I knowing Omori, I really feel like he's setting us up, and he's telling us, like, hey, this is going to go down, and this is going to go down poorly. So, I'm stoked, guys. I really didn't... I thought this was going to be like a 5-minute speech about a dating episode, and now we are like this deep into just a wild and crazy build-up episode. So let me know what you guys thought. Like, comment, share, all that normal good stuff. Sorry this was almost as long, if not longer, than the episode itself, but I love this episode. This episode was fantastic. And I cannot wait. Tomorrow we'll do the deep dive on the manga, episode 8 versus chapters 11 and 12. And then we'll get into some speculation stuff. We'll really... And I need to actually go back and do episodes 1 through 7 with the manga versus anime comparison. So expect all those videos to start trickling out here pretty quick. We'll start with episode 8, and then we'll start pretty much going episode 1 forward until we catch up. But see you guys again real soon. Like, comment, share. And I can't tell you how stoked I am for Wistoria 1 and Sword episode 9. If you are too, let me know. If you're not, what are you doing here? Or get better. Get better. Get hyped.